Oh, we don't have to go in
Back
any
to the,
particular order. Go ahead, Martha.
coming back to the third question, I think an advantage and a disadvantage in the play is that at least the elites share the common text of Ovid's Metamorphosis. So they have the same referent in a way that we don't anymore. So the media have become so fragmented that people can be in a bubble of only listening to sources that they agree with. And that's amplified by, whatever the Russian Internet Research Institute is doing with retweeting with bots. So very hard. We used to, like my grandmother, Walter Cronkite knew everything. and there is no Walter Cronkite or newspaper of record. I mean, people who are not on the side of change see the New York Times as biased toward the liberal side, and it used to be considered a source of record. So I think having Metamorphoses is kind of shows in a way what we've lost in terms of a common cultural history. On the other hand, that common cultural history was racist, ethnocentric, misogynistic, all of those things.
But there does seem to me there's a, for lack of a better way of describing this, there does seem to be something, a commonness to the kind of political rhetoric that defines the moment. It's binary, it's right, left, but there's, all of these media platforms, there's, an insane amount of information being generated constantly, but in terms of what it's expressing, it just seems very narrow. Kind of, in some ways, the simplicity of what we see with Lavinia at the end, that you have the complexity of a 330 million person country, and it gets all boiled down to this either or. And I think that in some ways, the play, while Ovid is certainly a central text, and there's incredible richness and diversity in Ovid, their use of Ovid really seems constrained in that it just leads to violence.
Yeah, but they're all looking at the same book.
Go ahead, Leah.
We also see that Lucius had several books, and Lavinia specifically chose that book. So I think there's also like this idea of how we choose our media to connect over. So just as Lavinia chose Ovid's because it had references to what she wanted to speak about, we also choose our media depending on what we're trying to speak about. We try to find the ones that have our stories, that have the words that we want to speak in. So I think it does lend this room, or like this space for bias to come in, but it's also what we have to resort to. We have to use research and use texts and things that we have to express our words or our thoughts, like Lavinia does.
Great point.
And I also think that kind of going back to what Bella was saying earlier, when she was talking about how she did research and her friend did research about their political views, and they tried to put each other in each other's place. This kind of reminded me of how Marcus and Titus were doing when they were trying to understand what Lavinia was trying to say, when they were giving her the staff and showing her how to write in the sand. This was like, it's the same way of trying to understand each other. And I think that that's one good point of how we can try to cross those bridges. Like Bella was trying to cross the bridge between her and her friend. That was how Marcus and Titus were trying to understand what Lavinia was saying. We have to put ourselves in their position, try to give them means to express themselves. And I think that that's one strong point that we could look to for crossing bridges and trying to get our message across, as Lavinia somewhat successfully does.
I think,
Go ahead.
I think, a lot of people say that our country is more divided than ever. which I do believe, but I also think that without this division, I would have never like had that conversation, like have these hard conversations, and we would never be, at least me and my friends and I would never come to this type of like critical thinking of just like being in a normal conversation together if our country was never in this much turmoil. So the fact, you know, as much as I wish there wasn't a pandemic and I wish our political state in our country was not like this in some way, I feel like we're gonna look back and it's almost like when bad things happen to you and you're like, you know, in some weird way you're kind of thankful for it because it makes you stronger. I can only assume that this is gonna make our country stronger in the long run, just because you do have to have those hard conversations with your family members and your friends, because the news cannot follow every single person around like the Kardashians and videotape your conversations. But that's why we do these things, you know, and share them. And without, you know, there's something to be said of what is happening, because I do think that, you know, the era of darkness is coming to an end. And I think that there is some sort of power reemerging from the people of just us citizens. And I do think that, you know, I have a very large social media platform with, you know, Professor, I have told you multiple times in class that I'm very involved in fashion. I run a fashion company with one of my friends who graduated from VCU at fashion merchandising. And we're only about 2.5 years old, but we have gotten invited to Paris Fashion Week, and we always get invited to New York Fashion Week, and we've just exploded, and it's amazing. And I can tell you right now, through social media and running a business, you have to be somewhat personal to have like loyal customers and just people to really connect with you. And it is possible to communicate your pain through an Instagram post, especially when you have very good writing skills like me. And I think and when you have a good picture to go along with it. But I think the people who don't have that, which is a lot of people, that is when we get very confused, and that is when people don't articulate things well. And I think even when people do know how to write very well, and people who do have a great image to go with it, there are still the people who are going to twist and turn things just because they don't have the right critical thinking, or it is in writing. And when sometimes we read things, we don't interpret it, you know, it's like narratology, like we don't think of it how the writer was writing it, kind of thing. So that is another way that pain or whatever you're writing gets misinterpreted. But I do know that pain can be communicated through the media. Obviously it can be communicated through the media because of what we have seen through Black Lives Matter. And I have seen it through my own self. So if anyone wants to add on to that.
Well, I mean, you've given us so much to work with. Just a couple points. Again, I think you've raised this really interesting distinction between, in terms of the conversations, understanding, that empathy that we identified, the difference between understanding and agreement. Agreement need not always be the goal.
Right.
It's to understand someone who disagrees with you. And that might be the best that we can hope for, right? And by not making agreement the goal, we avoid falling into that kind of that quasi-religious tribalism, right? And then also with the way in which you've been describing Instagram and other media platform is providing of having the capacity to communicate pain. I love your optimism. I don't agree with it. What I find really interesting about what you're saying, that I think the text is representing in some way, is that it is a process, right? It's the ability to communicate is not effortless, right? And that's the way we're
not effortless,
right. It's like we're in some ways socialized to make it seem like eloquence, beautiful writing is just natural. It just emanates out of us. When the reality is, it is a grind to really cultivate an idea, to express an idea or a feeling. And I think that's what you're identifying. So the extent to which those social media platforms or those tools can effectively communicate that pain, we have to really put in the time to develop our ability to use those to communicate that pain. The problem with Lavinia, of course, is that she's constrained not just by the mutilation, right? It's by the patriarchal definition of her body. You know, it won't allow her to get more creative with the staff or with the quoting, however is she quoting Ovid, right? That it's really serving the interest of the father. But there's something that we've always, that I've identified in the number of times I've taught this play. There's something so heroic about her efforts, even though her efforts seem to be ultimately inadequate in terms of what she's able to express. But that she's fighting to get it out is the starting point of really developing those skills. So you've helped at least to answer the question for me, because my tendency, for a range of reasons, my tendency is a more pessimistic one.
Yeah.
But I think you've enabled me to answer it in a more optimistic way.
One of the secondary sources we read, and I'm going to forget the name, talked about communication as a male prerogative, the pen penis.
Right.
And then
but Martha,
I read that.
Oh, you did read it?
Yeah.
Martha, keep in mind, you're making a reference to a text that not everyone will have read. So,
all right.
Provide as much context as possible.
All right. So this critic, who's scholar whose name I forgot, but the professor will fill in, says that the ability to communicate in general is a male prerogative, talking about the patriarchy, right. And that everybody's interpreting Lavinia, but yet she seizes the initiative and becomes a writer, however limited, in this scene of writing in the sand. So it's a somewhat empowering.
Right.
You're saying with limitations, but.
Right. And I wasn't persuaded. I'm forgetting her name myself. It's Jakowski. It's Jakowski. I think Evelyn Jakowski.
I thought it was the other one. Oh, whatever.
It's the blank page one. I think you're referencing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's Jakowski. And I wasn't persuaded by what seemed this forced optimistic turn in her essay.
Yeah.
That she was talking about the woman as a blank page in the male pen penis, right? So the women are always at a disadvantage attempting to occupy a male position. But then at the end of that essay or that chapter, she talks about creative ways of expression that Lavinia and other women engage in. And I wasn't exactly persuaded by it, but I think, as I said, Bella kind of is helping me, regardless of what position you occupy within, let's say within the still rigid gender binary of our society. There is a capacity to appropriate or to take up that pen and cultivate the ability to express in potentially, let's say, in quotes, original ways, one's pain.
Mm-hmm.
Can I relate that back to what you asked earlier, and I've been thinking about? How does Lavinia quote from the leaves without, right? And I immediately wondered if that's just through her facial expression and her eyes. So women are like emotion and men are logic in the pen. And then she's breaking through to the other way of communicating so that we're not limited to just the one. I didn't know, but I didn't know where you were going with that or what people say about what that means, but her face, that's how we mostly communicate. So that's why I need to see you, call your name, look you in the eye, so you can read my intent and my emotions, and I can read yours. It's hard to depersonalize somebody that you're looking right in their eyes.
But doesn't his using, that is Titus using the word quote, his attempt to describe her pain, it forces this, in some ways, this innovative use of the word itself. So that, because it just struck us as we were reading it, it's like, well, what does this mean in this context? This is not, it doesn't strike me as a conventional use or even a common use of the term quote. But this isn't a common or conventional circumstance.
And I thought if she was mirroring the emotion in the text rather than the words of the text, right? And that's what, like most books, like poetry, it's the emotion that draws you to it as much as the words sometimes. And so if that's how she's quoting the emotions through her facial features, I don't know. I mean, yeah.
That sounds great.
I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna say that's what she's doing.
It sounds great. Yes.
Norton translates quotes as examines, but I guess that's just one editor's gloss in that line.
That seems so dull, doesn't it?
Yes.
Examines, like really? So we have this raped and mutilated woman desperately trying to communicate her pain to her male relatives, and quotes means examines. We're just about out of time, so any other final comments?
Can I share one more connection?
Okay.
Go ahead.
When Titus was talking about his military service, and no one was listening and giving him credit for the fact that he fought for 10 years, I was thinking about the Suckers and Losers article talking about the president talking about the military, that it's frustrating and unfair that this brave general doesn't get the benefit of the doubt from the tribunes he fought for while they slept in their beds.
Right. Bella, you had a final comment?
Yeah, for the second question, what things stop us from expressing our pain? And I did want to say that I think media does stop us from expressing our pain, because I think it is scary for some people to be that vulnerable, to write about their pain and share it with the world and have that bravery to do that. And I think when she had to write the names with the stick and show her vulnerability of, oh, like I'm writing with my, like that is a lot of vulnerability in front of men. Like that takes, that is what would stop a lot of people from, I'd rather just stay quiet than just be like humiliated that I can barely write with a staff. So I think that's what stops people from sharing their pain, is that they are afraid that they will look stupid.
Right. And that's why we described it as it's heroic.
Yeah.
Right. It's at once desperate, but also heroic.
Yeah.
So we're completely out of time, but again, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. We are committed to keeping this going, and we definitely appreciate your attendance. Okay.
When is the next one? Is the next one scheduled?
When is the next one, Aaliyah? It should be about a month from now. Like
it's November 19th on
19th.
Hamilton.
Oh, okay.
Just doing one's job.
Yeah, so I'm working on that one.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank y'all.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Nice job, Leah.
Thank
Take care.
you. Thank you so
Bye.
much.